Remember Game of Thrones? Don't worry, we're not going to talk about Season 8. The fantasy world of Westeros has 7 kingdoms, each with noble houses vying for power, influence, and, well, survival. It's a giant game of chess where characters are motivated by love, revenge, honor, legacy, and sometimes just wine and vibes. But the ultimate goal is the Iron Throne, the symbol of supreme power. And whoever controls that seat of swords controls the fate of Westeros. What's great about Game of Thrones is that power isn't just won through military battles. There are clever alliances, strategic marriages, and the control of key resources like food or access to the seas. The great houses are constantly maneuvering, forming alliances, and betraying each other in their endless quest for dominance over the realm. You may not realize this, but nations around the world are actually playing a very similar game in Earth's orbit and beyond. Hello, I'm Mike Antares, and this is Space for Humans. This video will explore how space exploration bears a striking similarity to Game of Thrones. When you look up at the night sky, you probably already know that in addition to the stars and planets, there are several thousand tons of space equipment in and beyond Earth's orbit. If you think back to the first moon landing, you'll realize there are also flags. Symbols of national pride up there too. So while space remains a domain that should be accessible to all, it's also an area where countries promote their own nationalist ambitions and vie for technological superiority. Set a few hundred years before the Game of Thrones series, another show called House of the Dragon showcases the political, personal, and military clash between two factions. The Greens, backed by House Hightower, and the Blacks of House Targaryen. No spoilers here, but you can see that in the skies above Westeros, the dragons controlled by these two warring factions offered a very magical example of technological superiority. The Cold War space race between the United States and the Soviet Union mirrors this conflict of dragons. Let's call it the Reds versus the Red, White, and Blues. Both nations use space exploration as a way to assert their technological supremacy. So while the moon landing in 1969 may have been a giant leap for humankind, it really was only one battle in a decades-long struggle to demonstrate which nation was better at spacefaring. Now, let's fast forward to the time of Game of Thrones. Here we see many powerful houses: Lannisters, Starks, Baratheons, and still the Targaryens. They're competing for the control of the Iron Throne. However, while they all seek power, military dominance is just one aspect of their strategy. Most houses have specific goals: securing influence, forming alliances, protecting family honor, or safeguarding their regions. They pursue these ambitions through various means. Conflict, yes, but also marriage, diplomacy, strategic gifts, and more than a little manipulation. Similarly, today's new space race is much more crowded and complex than it was 4 decades ago. Major space powers like the United States, China, Russia, and the European Space Agency continue to lead with advanced commercial and military technologies. Each of these superpowers has plans for manned missions to the moon within the next decade, and there are competing space stations. China operates the Tiangong space station, while the US, with the participation of ESA and Japan's JAXA, are racing to establish the first private commercial space station to replace the aging ISS. Like the great houses, what sets these space powers apart is their global influence. They boast multi-trillion-dollar economies, advanced militaries, and they play active roles in shaping the future of space exploration through international dialogue, along with diplomacy and action. Like the Starks, Lannisters, Baratheons, and Targaryens, they're not just competing for power, they are also leveraging their strengths and forming strategic partnerships to secure their long-term positions in this new era of space exploration. So what do we mean by power? The easiest way to understand this is hard power. Military and economic dominance through coercion and superiority. Think dragons or wildfire. The Targaryens had overwhelming military power, and today nations exert hard power through standing armies and by advancing their military and technological capabilities. In space, this might be anti-satellite weapons and space-based missile systems, capable of disabling or destroying satellites and potentially crippling a nation's communications and defense infrastructure. The United States, Russia, China, and India have all tested these weapons, and the creation of military branches like the US Space Force and China's Aerospace Force highlight this shift as nations increasingly view space as a domain of warfare. There is increasing concern over satellites equipped with offensive capabilities such as lasers or kinetic weapons. While no country has openly deployed such systems, the technology does exist. As space becomes more militarized, the risks of open conflict increase, prompting the need for new treaties and agreements to prevent such escalation. But as the 8 seasons of Game of Thrones showed us, soft power, wielded through political and cultural influence, is an equally viable option. To learn more, let's take a look at the powerful houses to examine how similar the geo and astropolitics of space are to Game of Thrones. The Tyrells of the Reach leveraged their fertile lands to amass wealth and influence, becoming vital players in the power dynamics of Westeros. By supplying food for much of the realm, the Tyrells exemplify how control over essential resources shapes authority. In the real world, a resource like oil serves a similar purpose. Nations like Saudi Arabia, with vast reserves, wield considerable power in global geopolitics. Countries such as the US and China rely heavily on oil to fuel their industries and military operations, just as Westeros depends on the Tyrells' agricultural bounty. In the arena of space, future resources may emerge from asteroid mining for precious metals or harvesting water ice from the moon's shadowed craters. The moon's helium-3 reserves could revolutionize energy production, kind of like how the dragon glass beneath Dragonstone became the most sought-after mineral for defeating the White Walkers. Nations that secure these extraterrestrial resources and return them to Earth will gain significant economic and technological advantage, paralleling the dominance of countries with rich natural resources on Earth. The implications are vast. Control over space mining could redefine the global balance of power. In Game of Thrones, the Greyjoys of the Iron Islands possess formidable naval power, enabling them to disrupt Westeros' economy through raiding and controlling crucial maritime routes. Today, trade routes like the South China Sea play a similar role, facilitating the movement of trillions of dollars worth of goods and providing leverage in international politics. China is vying for dominance in this vital region by establishing military bases and artificial islands, positioning itself to control these strategic shipping lanes. In space, key locations might include orbital pathways, limited yet essential for communications, navigation, and surveillance satellites. In Game of Thrones, the Lannisters maintain power not only through their wealth, but also through adept political maneuvering. They master the art of strategic marriages to forge alliances with other houses, exemplified by Cersei's marriage to Robert Baratheon. That catalyzes their rise to power on the Iron Throne. Similarly, in the realm of space geopolitics, the capacity to influence international treaties and alliances is critical for shaping the rules of engagement. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 established a foundation for peaceful space use. But as technology and ambitions evolve, new treaties are necessary to address challenges like resource extraction, military applications, and the role of the private sector. Efforts like the Paros Treaty, which stands for Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space, aim to prevent the militarization of space. But progress has been slow due to reluctance from space superpowers to commit to those clauses. Initiatives like the Artemis Accords attempt to establish norms for space exploration and resource utilization, but challenges remain regarding the fair and equitable distribution of resources, the ability to claim territories on celestial bodies, and how to govern extraterrestrial property. You get the idea. Even if the metaphors are not exact, the great houses can offer some compelling comparisons to the major spacefaring nations of today, especially when you consider the great power theory of geostrategic dynamics. The nations with the most power, China, Russia, the US, and sometimes the EU, use both hard and soft power to influence geo and astropolitics, much like the members of the great houses. While the great houses of spacefaring nations still seek dominance, both militarily and economically, more recent spacefaring nations like India, the United Arab Emirates, and private companies like SpaceX are carving out their own paths. These paths might include advancing scientific exploration economic growth, or achieving national prestige. Think about Samuel Tarly. He spends most of the series collecting knowledge about the White Walkers, dragons, and the histories of Westeros, focusing on the broader threat of the White Walkers. He doesn't seek power or influence in the traditional sense, and actually, his research has benefits for all. Similarly, many emergent countries are focused on specific goals rather than competing solely for supremacy. Collectively, these efforts highlight not just technological advancements, but also the geopolitical strategies and economic stakes shaping the future of space. Let's look at just two examples. India recently made headlines with its cost-effective Mars orbiter, successful launch vehicle mission, and a recent lunar South Pole landing. The UAE sent an astronaut to the ISS, a mission to the moon, and a probe to Mars. They aim to build a human settlement on Mars in 2117. These nations and many others like them are contributing fresh ideas, new technologies, and a focus on the sustainable development of space. You can learn more about that in our Emerging Spacefaring Nations playlist. Not every player seeks to sit on the Iron Throne. In fact, this sort of orientation has historically led to war, death, and destruction. International bodies like the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, or UNUSA, have facilitated discussions on integrating economic, environmental, and regulatory dimensions into space activities, ensuring that participation in space is not exclusive to the great houses. Won't someone please think of the realm? And that is important because there are many issues in space that require cooperation, not competition. With more satellites and missions, space debris has become a serious issue. Defunct satellites, spent rocket stages, and anti-satellite weaponry tests are creating a debris field that will take more and more time and money to navigate. Space debris is an example issue that requires global cooperation. Nations must work together to manage and mitigate the risks posed by debris, developing new technologies to track, remove, and prevent future accumulation. Without collective action, this growing debris field could endanger the very infrastructure that powers the modern world. Just as the Seven Kingdoms must ultimately find a way to coexist for peace to return to Westeros, we must approach space as a shared frontier, one where cooperation rather than dominance is essential. It's easy to think of space as distant and disconnected from daily life, but those satellites power our GPS, enable global communications and media, and help us monitor climate change and wildfires, and so much more. Any disruption to space infrastructure could have profound impacts on our economy and our way of life. The future of space should not be about who sits on the Iron Throne or the iron-rich asteroid. It can instead be about building a shared destiny, one that benefits all people and ensures that space remains a peaceful and prosperous domain for generations to come. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this Westerosi-themed explainer insightful, give us a like, share, and hit that subscribe button so we can continue exploring space for humans together. This watch has ended.